The Forgotten Ones. Chapter 8. Through the Looking Glass. The sound of shattering glass lingered in Alice's ears, long after the pieces had fallen away, cascading into the darkness like brittle raindrops. For a moment, there was nothing but a void. No sound, no light, just an overwhelming sensation of falling through the blackness. Time lost meaning. Minutes could have been hours. Hours, seconds. The endless abyss swallowed him whole. And then, with a bone-jarring thud, Ellis landed hard on the cold ground. His vision swam as he gasped for air, the sensation of solid earth beneath him jarring after the disorienting freefall. He coughed, pulling himself upright, his hands scraping against the rough stone floor. The sharp, musty smell of damp air filled his lungs, and he quickly realized he was no longer in the sterile, mirrored corridors. Wherever he was now, it felt older, deeper. Alice blinked through the haze of dizziness and looked around. The chamber he found himself in was dimly lit. The flickering light coming from torches mounted along the stone walls. The flames cast long, wavering shadows across the room, each flicker bringing the darkness to life in the corners of his vision. The ceiling above loomed high, its arches stretching into shadow, while the walls were inscribed with strange, ancient markings, symbols that Alice didn't recognize. It was like stepping into another world. He rose slowly, his body aching from the fall. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of an exit. The chamber felt wrong, like it wasn't meant for the living. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, something ancient and angry, as if the very walls had been carved from darkness itself. Alice took a step forward, wincing as his foot echoed through the chamber, the sound unnaturally loud in the eerie silence. He kept moving, his gaze locked on the far side of the room, where he thought he saw a faint outline of a doorway. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on him. And though he tried to shake the feeling, he couldn't escape the sensation that something was watching him, lurking just beyond the edges of the flickering light. The Watchers. Ellis froze mid-step. He turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. In the far corner of the chamber, where the shadows were darkest, he saw them. Figures. They stood motionless, their bodies draped in tattered, hooded robes, their faces obscured. But Ellis didn't need to see their eyes to feel their gaze. The weight of it was crushing, suffocating, like a predator locking in on its prey. There were no whispers now, only the unbearable silence as they watched him. Fear gripped him. He didn't know what they wanted, what they were waiting for, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stay here. Ellis turned and ran. The Watchers didn't move, didn't chase him. They didn't need to. He could feel their presence crawling over his skin, lingering in the darkness, waiting for him to falter, to give in to the fear gnawing at his mind. The doorway loomed ahead, carved into the stone like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Ellis threw himself toward it, barely pausing to take in the strange, intricate carvings that framed it. More symbols, spirals, and runes that glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. He stumbled through the threshold, his breath ragged, and found himself in yet another room. But this one was different. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its frame made of polished black stone, twisted and gnarled like tree roots. The surface of the mirror rippled faintly, as though it wasn't solid, but liquid, and reflected in its depths was not Ellis's own image, but the Watchers. Their forms shifted unnaturally in the reflection, closer now, their hoods pulled low over faces Ellis couldn't see. Alice's breath caught in his throat. He had seen enough mirrors to know this one was different, dangerous. This was no ordinary reflection. This was a doorway, a portal. To where? He didn't want to find out. But something drew him in. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if on its own, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the mirror. It rippled beneath his touch, sending shivers up his arm, but he didn't pull away. The watchers in the reflection shifted, their forms distorting as though they were being stretched by the mirror's surface. And then, slowly, they began to emerge. Ellis stumbled backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. The shadows in the mirror twisted and morphed, bleeding into reality, crawling out of the glass like smoke. First, their hands, then their hooded forms. They stepped out of the mirror in unison, silent and ominous, their presence making the air around them feel cold, lifeless. Ellis backed up, his body shaking with terror. There was nowhere to run this time. The watchers were here, in the room with him, and the doorway behind him had vanished, replaced by another smooth stone wall. He was trapped. One of the watchers stepped forward, its movement slow, deliberate. Ellis tried to move, but his legs felt like lead, his body refusing to obey. The figure raised a hand, and for the first time, Ellis saw what was hidden beneath the hood. Its face, or what was left of it, was a swirling void. A hollow blackness where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. A complete absence of anything human. As it reached out, the void seemed to expand, pulling Ellis toward it, dragging him into the darkness. Panic surged through him. He fought against the pull, his heart hammering in his chest. But the force was too strong. He could feel the emptiness closing in, wrapping around him like a cold, suffocating blanket. His vision blurred, the world around him growing dimmer, until all that remained was the Watcher's void-like face, consuming everything. Just as the darkness was about to swallow him whole, a voice pierced through the blackness. Ellis. He gasped, the sound of his name breaking the spell. He staggered back, the Watcher's grip loosening. His eyes darted around the room. Searching for the source of the voice, it was familiar. Painfully so. Ellis. Please. It was Peter. Ellis's heart clenched. Peter's voice came from somewhere deeper in the chamber. Somewhere beyond the mirror. Without thinking, Ellis tore his gaze from the Watchers and sprinted toward the sound, his mind racing with desperate hope. He couldn't lose Peter, not after coming so far. The Watchers didn't follow, but their presence lingered in the room. A weight that pressed down on him as he ran deeper into the unknown. His feet pounded against the stone floor, the echoes ringing in his ears like the ticking of a clock. Each step reminding him how little time he had left. The hallway he found himself in was narrow, the walls closing in with each step, but the voice grew louder, guiding him forward. His brother's voice was fragile, broken by something beyond Ellis's understanding, but it was Peter. It had to be. As Ellis rounded a corner, the hall opened up into another room, a vast, empty space illuminated by a faint blue glow. And there, in the center of the room, stood Peter. But it wasn't Peter. Not really. The figure before him was distorted, his features twisted and wrong, like a reflection in a broken mirror. His skin was pale, almost translucent, his eyes sunken and hollow. The smile on his face, a terrible, unnatural grin, didn't belong to his brother. Peter, Ellis whispered, his voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, the grin widening unnervingly. Ellis, it said, in Peter's voice, though something in the tone was off. Too flat. Too hollow. I've been waiting for you. Alice's heart sank. This wasn't Peter. It was something else. Something using his brother's face, his voice. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and his breath came in shallow gasps. The thing wearing Peter's face took a step closer, its movement slow, deliberate. We can be together again, Alice, just like before. You don't have to be afraid. But Alice was afraid, more afraid than he had ever been. He could feel the cold weight of the Watchers still looming in the background, their presence creeping closer, their intentions unknown. And this thing, this twisted version of his brother, wasn't offering salvation. It was offering something far worse. "You're not Peter," Alice forced out, taking a step back, his voice shaking with fear and grief. "You're not him." The smile faltered, just for a second, but then it returned, more grotesque than before. "Come, Alice." The thing crooned, its voice growing deeper, darker. "Don't fight it. You belong here, with us. Forever." Alice's back hit the wall, and he realized there was nowhere left to run. The Watchers were closing in, and the thing pretending to be Peter was inching closer, its outstretched hand beckoning him toward the abyss. Terror surged through him, and he clenched his fists, his mind racing for a way out. But as he stared into the hollow, empty eyes of the creature before him, something inside him shifted. Something stronger than fear. "I'm not staying here," Alice whispered, his voice barely audible. "I won't let you take me." The creature stopped, its grin faltering again, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a roar of desperation, Alice lunged toward the mirror at the far side of the room, his only chance at escape. His fist collided with the glass, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The room exploded with light as the mirror disintegrated, the shards raining down around him like a storm of stars. The Watchers vanished, their forms dissolving into the air, and the creature wearing Peter's face let out a piercing shriek before fading into the void. Alice collapsed to the floor, his chest heaving, the echoes of the shattered mirror fading into silence. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the room was still. Quiet. Alice's hands trembled as he looked around, but the chamber was empty now. No Watchers. No twisted reflection of his brother. Only Alice, alone in the dark. With a heavy heart, he stood, his legs weak beneath him. The weight of what he'd just survived threatened to crush him, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep moving. He had to find the real Peter. Somewhere beyond the darkness, his brother was still waiting for him. And Alice wasn't going to give up. Not yet. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey. Alice may have shattered the mirror, but his fight is far from over. What awaits him deeper in the shadows? Will he find Peter, or will the darkness claim him first? If you're ready for more chills and twists, make sure you don't miss the next chapter. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to stay up to date, and share this story with your fellow horror fans. Until next time, keep your lights on. You never know what's lurking just beyond the glass. The stories may end, but the nightmares continue. Sleep soundly, if your mind lets you.